In the brutal Montana frontier where survival meant trusting no one, Rhett Callahan built his life on one unshakable principle: love destroys men. But when a runaway wagon threatened to kill the one woman who refused to fear him, he made a choice that shattered everything he believed. What followed wasn't just a story of romance, it was a war between a man's deepest terror and the only thing powerful enough to save him. Stay with me until the end. Drop a like and comment your city below. I want to see how far this story travels. The Montana sky stretched vast and indifferent, a canvas of bruised purples and fading golds as the sun bled out over the Bitterroot Range. The land here didn't forgive. It didn't negotiate. It simply waited, patient as death, for men to make their inevitable mistakes. Rhett Callahan understood that better than most. He stood on the porch of his ranch house, a structure as austere as the man himself: weathered wood, sharp angles, no adornment. The cigarette between his fingers had burned down to nothing, ash crumbling into the wind. He didn't notice. His eyes, the color of storm clouds before lightning, fixed on the horizon where his property met the wilderness. 4,300 acres of unforgiving earth, every inch of it bought with blood, sweat, and the kind of silence that could drive lesser men to madness. But Rhett wasn't lesser, and he preferred the silence. "Boss?" The voice came from behind, Jake Hendricks, his foreman, a grizzled man whose face told stories Rhett had never asked to hear. "What is it?" "Fence is down on the north pasture. Looks like something big pushed through. Maybe a bear, maybe something else." Rhett flicked the cigarette stub into the dirt. "Fix it." "Gonna need supplies from town." "Town." The word tasted like obligation. "Then go to town." Jake shifted his weight, boots scraping against wood. "Figured you might want to go yourself. Been 3 weeks since—" "I said fix it." Rhett's tone didn't rise, but it didn't need to. The conversation was over. Jake nodded and retreated, his footsteps fading into the stable yard where the other hands worked in practiced silence. They'd learned quickly. Rhett Callahan paid well, demanded excellence, and offered nothing resembling warmth. Men worked for him, took his money, and kept their distance. Exactly how he wanted it. Rhett turned back to the horizon. The sun had slipped lower, painting the grasslands in shades of amber and shadow. Beautiful, in the way a graveyard could be beautiful. Peaceful, in the way death was peaceful. His father had loved sunsets. The memory surfaced unbidden, unwelcome. Daniel Callahan standing in almost this exact spot, one arm around Rhett's mother, watching the sky burn, smiling, happy. That was before the fever took her, before Daniel crumbled into something hollow and haunted, spending his remaining years staring at an empty chair, waiting for a ghost that never came. Love had done that to him. Love had killed him as surely as any bullet. Rhett was 12 when he'd watched them bury his father, 15 when he'd made his vow, 18 when he'd left the homestead and everything it represented. Now, at 34, he'd built something different, a life stripped of vulnerability, of attachment, of the weakness that turned men into shells. He survived. He controlled. He never ever let anyone close enough to matter. It was the only rule that mattered. The town of Stillwater sat in a valley like a collection of children's blocks scattered by careless hands, uneven, haphazard, clinging to existence through sheer stubbornness. Main Street ran straight as a rifle shot through the center. General store, saloon, blacksmith, bank, hotel, church. Buildings that served function over form, built by men who understood that beauty was a luxury the frontier couldn't afford. Rhett rode in 3 days later, only because Jake had been right about the supplies. The mare beneath him, a steel-gray quarter horse named Ash, picked her way through the mud-rutted street with the careful precision of experience. It had rained the night before, turning the road into a slick mess that grabbed at wagon wheels and tested the patience of horses and men alike. He dismounted outside Crawford's general store, looping Ash's reins around the hitching post with practiced efficiency. The animal huffed, shaking her mane. "Won't be long," he murmured. Ash was the only living thing he spoke to with anything resembling gentleness. Horses didn't ask questions, didn't need explanations, didn't expect him to be anything other than what he was. The store's interior smelled of leather, tobacco, and the faint sweetness of dried fruit. Silas Crawford stood behind the counter, spectacles perched on a nose that had been broken at least twice. He looked up when Rhett entered, recognition flickering across his weathered face. "Mr. Callahan, didn't expect to see you this month." "Need fence supplies, wire, posts, the usual." Silas nodded, already moving toward the back storage. "Give me 10 minutes to pull it together. Can load it on your wagon if—" "I'll take it now. I'm on horseback." "All of it?" Rhett's expression didn't change. "I'll make 2 trips." It was inefficient, and Silas knew better than to point that out. The man disappeared into the back, leaving Rhett alone with the quiet tick of the wall clock and the muffled sounds of the street outside. That's when he heard it. The voice. "I don't care what's customary here, Mr. Crawford. I ordered those books 6 weeks ago. The children need them." Female. Eastern accent, crisp and clear as winter morning. Educated. And clearly not interested in whatever excuse was being offered. "Ma'am, I understand, but the freight wagon arrives every Tuesday. It arrived yesterday. Either the books are here, or someone needs to explain what happened to them." Rhett turned slightly, just enough to see through the doorway that led to Silas's office. A woman stood with her back to him, straight-spined in a traveling dress the color of deep forest green. Dark hair pinned up in a style too refined for Stillwater, gloved hands gesturing with contained frustration. Silas's voice dropped to that particular tone men used when trying to placate women they thought hysterical. "Miss Whitmore, I'm sure if you just—" "I'm not hysterical, Mr. Crawford. I'm simply expecting the service I paid for." Rhett almost smiled. Almost. "Let me check the inventory again," Silas said, defeat creeping into his tone. The woman, Miss Whitmore, turned, and for a brief moment, her eyes met Rhett's through the doorway. Dark eyes. Sharp. Assessing. She held his gaze for exactly 2 seconds, long enough for him to register high cheekbones, a mouth set in determination, and the kind of presence that filled a room despite her modest height. Then she looked away, dismissing him as thoroughly as if he'd ceased to exist. Something about that irritated him more than it should have. Silas returned to the main room, wiping his hands on his apron. "Got your supplies ready, Mr. Callahan. I'll just—" A commotion erupted outside. Shouts. The thunder of hooves moving too fast. Rhett was already moving before his brain caught up to instinct, shoving through the door onto the wooden walkway that fronted the store. Other people were emerging from buildings, drawn by the noise. A wagon careened down Main Street, massive freight hauler, 2 horses in full panic pulling a load that swayed dangerously with every lurch. The driver was gone, probably thrown. The reins dragged in the mud, tangling around the wheels, and directly in the wagon's path, frozen in the middle of the street, stood a small girl. Couldn't have been more than 7. Blonde braids, blue dress, eyes wide with the kind of terror that paralyzed, time fractured. Rhett vaulted the porch railing, boots hitting mud, legs pumping. The world narrowed to vectors and velocity, the wagon's trajectory, the girl's position, the shrinking distance between disaster and catastrophe. 20 yards, 15. He could hear the horses screaming now, see foam flying from their mouths. 10 yards. The girl still hadn't moved. Shock had rooted her in place. 5. Rhett hit her like a linebacker, arms wrapping around her small frame, lifting her off her feet as he twisted, using his body as a shield. They hit the mud hard, rolling, and the wagon thundered past so close he felt the displacement of air, heard the crack of wood and the spray of mud as the wheels churned inches from his head. Then it was gone, careening toward the end of the street where a cluster of men managed to grab the trailing reins and muscle the panicked horses to a halt. Silence rushed in, broken only by Rhett's harsh breathing and the soft whimpering of the child in his arms. "Are you hurt?" His voice came out rougher than intended. The girl shook her head, tears streaming down dirty cheeks. I couldn't move. I saw it coming, and I couldn't—" "You're safe now." "Emma." Rhett looked up to find the woman from the store, Miss Whitmore, running toward them, dress hitched up past her ankles, face drained of color. She dropped to her knees in the mud beside them, hands immediately checking the girl for injuries. "Emma, sweetheart, are you hurt? Did you hit your head? Does anything—" "I'm okay, Miss Clara. The man, he saved me." Clara Whitmore's hands stilled. She looked at Rhett, really looked at him, and something shifted in her expression. shock giving way to comprehension, and then to something that might have been gratitude, except it was too fierce, too raw. You... She stopped, swallowed. You could have been killed. Rhett stood, mud coating his duster, and extended a hand to help her up. She took it automatically, her grip surprisingly strong for someone who looked like she belonged in a Boston drawing room. But I wasn't, he said simply. A crowd had formed. Voices overlapped, questions, exclamations, someone asking if the sheriff had been called. Rhett ignored them, focused on extracting himself from the situation as quickly as possible. You should take her inside, get her warm. Clara nodded, but her eyes stayed on his face, searching for something he didn't want found. What's your name? Doesn't matter. It matters to me. The words hung between them, weighted with meaning he didn't want to examine. Behind her, he could see Silas Crawford and half the town watching this interaction with the kind of interest that would fuel gossip for weeks. Rhett Callahan, he said finally, because refusing seemed more conspicuous than answering. Mr. Callahan. She said his name like she was filing it away somewhere permanent. I'm Clara Whitmore. This is Emma Brennan, one of my students. What you did, anyone would have done it. But you did it. The distinction seemed important to her. Rhett didn't know what to do with that, so he did what he always did, retreated. Your student should see a doctor. Even if she feels fine now, shock can... I know what shock can do, Mr. Callahan. There was no bite in the words, just statement of fact. I'll take her to Dr. Morrison immediately. She gathered Emma close, murmuring reassurances, and began walking toward the doctor's office at the far end of the street. But after 3 steps, she paused and turned back. Thank you, Clara said, and the simplicity of it, the absolute sincerity, hit harder than it had any right to. Rhett nodded once. It was all the acknowledgement he could manage. He watched her walk away, this Eastern schoolteacher in her mud-stained dress, and felt something uncomfortable settle in his chest, something that felt dangerously close to curiosity. Then Silas appeared at his elbow, grinning like a man who'd just witnessed divine intervention. Well, hell, Callahan, you're a damn hero. I'm leaving. Have my supplies ready in an hour. Sure, but you know the whole town's going to be talking about us. Rhett walked away mid-sentence, heading for the saloon and the whiskey that would help him forget the feel of dark eyes assessing him, finding him worthy of gratitude. Finding him, for one moment, worth knowing. Geek. The Lucky Strike Saloon occupied the moral center of Stillwater, which was to say it occupied no moral ground whatsoever. It was a place for drinking, gambling, and the kind of forgetting that came at the bottom of a bottle. Rhett appreciated its honesty. The interior matched the exterior. Rough wood, rougher company, and the perpetual smell of spilled liquor and tobacco smoke. A few men looked up when he entered, recognition and wariness flickering in equal measure. Rhett Callahan wasn't trouble, exactly, but he also wasn't the kind of man you approached without cause. He took his usual spot at the end of the bar, away from windows, back to the wall. Old habits from older days. Tom Bridger, the bartender and owner, poured 2 fingers of whiskey without being asked. He was a massive man, 6'4" and built like a grain silo, with the kind of calm that came from seeing every form of human stupidity at least twice. Heard you pulled a miracle on Main Street, Tom said, sliding the glass across scarred wood. Heard wrong, just grabbed a kid before she got trampled. That's the definition of a miracle out here. Rhett drank. The whiskey burned clean and honest, no pretense. New schoolteacher seems grateful, Tom continued, wiping down the bar with a rag that had seen better days. Miss Whitmore, arrived about 6 weeks back, came all the way from Philadelphia to teach in our little slice of nowhere. Good for her. She's got spine, I'll give her that. Most Eastern ladies take one look at Stillwater and head straight back to civilization. Not her. Set up that schoolhouse, gathered up every kid in 20 miles, and got to work. Even the ranchers who swore their boys didn't need book learning are sending them now. Rhett said nothing, which Tom correctly interpreted as disinterest, but the bartender had known him long enough to push just a little. Of course, having a woman like that around, educated, pretty, unmarried, it's got every single man in the territory measuring himself for Sunday clothes. Ben Morrison's been sniffing around, so has that lawyer, Thornton. Fascinating, Tom laughed. You really don't care about anything, do you? I care about my ranch, my horses, and whether this whiskey's been watered down. It hasn't. Then we're good. The door swung open, bringing with it a gust of wind and Marcus Webb, the town's self-appointed voice of moral authority. He was a banker, which meant he trafficked in numbers and judgment in equal measure. His gaze swept the saloon with practiced distaste before landing on Rhett. Callahan. Rhett didn't turn. Webb. Hell of a thing you did today. The whole town's talking about it. The whole town needs better hobbies. Webb approached anyway, settling onto the bar stool 2 down from Rhett, close enough to converse, far enough to maintain propriety. He ordered brandy, which told you everything you needed to know about Marcus Webb. Miss Whitmore asked me to find you, Webb said, swirling his drink. Wants to thank you properly. Perhaps dinner at the hotel? Tell her she already thanked me. I think she meant more than words. Then tell her words are enough. Webb's expression tightened. You know, Callahan, most men would consider an invitation from a woman like Clara Whitmore to be, most men aren't me. No, Webb agreed, and something sharp entered his tone. Most men have the decency to participate in society, to acknowledge when someone's trying to show appreciation. Rhett finally turned, giving Webb the full weight of his attention. You offering social advice now, Marcus? Because I don't remember asking for it. The temperature in the immediate vicinity dropped several degrees. Tom Bridger, wisely, found urgent business at the other end of the bar. Webb held his ground, which Rhett respected even as he found it irritating. I'm saying that Miss Whitmore is a respectable woman who deserves respect, not whatever cold shoulder you're planning to give her. I saved a kid from getting trampled. That doesn't create an obligation. It creates gratitude, and around here, we honor gratitude. Around here, Rhett said quietly, people mind their own damn business. He finished his whiskey, dropped coins on the bar, and stood. Webb watched him with a mixture of frustration and something else. Perhaps concern, perhaps pity. Rhett didn't care which. She's going to ask again, Webb called after him. Miss Whitmore isn't the type to let things go. Rhett paused at the door. Then she'll learn. Outside, the afternoon had aged into early evening. The street had returned to its normal rhythm. People moving between buildings, conducting business, living lives. The freight wagon had been cleared away, the mud already beginning to dry in the ceaseless wind. Rhett collected his supplies from Crawford's store, loaded them onto Ash with efficient movements, and prepared to ride out. Away from town, away from conversations he didn't want, away from dark-eyed women who looked at him like he was something other than what he was. Mr. Callahan? He closed his eyes briefly. Of course. When he turned, Clara Whitmore stood 6 feet away, Emma beside her holding the woman's hand. The girl had been cleaned up, the doctor apparently pronouncing her fit. But Clara looked different than she had in the chaos, composed now, deliberate in a way that suggested she'd been planning this conversation. Miss Whitmore, I'm sorry to interrupt your departure, but Emma wanted to thank you herself. The child stepped forward, small and solemn. Thank you for saving me, Mr. Callahan. You were very brave. Something twisted in Rhett's chest. He crouched down to her level, making himself smaller, less intimidating. You're welcome, Emma, but next time you see a runaway wagon, you run, fast as you can. Don't freeze, understand? She nodded, blonde braids bouncing. I will. I promise. Good girl. Emma returned to Clara's side, and Rhett stood, intending to mount up and ride before this interaction could extend further. But Clara spoke again, her voice carrying that crisp eastern clarity that seemed to cut through Montana's rough edges like a knife through butter. I'd like to invite you to dinner, Mr. Callahan. Tomorrow evening, if you're available. The hotel serves a decent meal, and I'd appreciate the opportunity to thank you properly. There it was, the invitation Webb had warned about. That's not necessary. Perhaps not necessary, but desired. I don't like being in someone's debt. You're not in my debt. Then consider it an opportunity for me to make a new acquaintance in an unfamiliar place. I've been in Stillwater 6 weeks and barely know anyone outside of my students and their parents. She was good. Shifting the dynamic, making it about her needs rather than his heroism. Clever. I'm sure there are plenty of men in town who'd be happy to. I'm not inviting them. I'm inviting you. Rhett studied her properly for the first time. In the fading light, he could see details he'd missed in the chaos. The intelligence in her eyes, yes, but also the exhaustion around their edges. The way she held herself with perfect posture that spoke of discipline rather than comfort. The small callus on her right hand's index finger from holding a pen or chalk. She was tired, lonely, trying to build something in a place that didn't particularly want her brand of civilization. He should say no, should ride out, forget this conversation, maintain the boundaries that kept him safe. I don't do dinner invitations, he heard himself say. But if you're at the hotel restaurant tomorrow at 6, and I happen to be there, I suppose we might end up at the same table. It was the smallest concession possible, wrapped in enough ambiguity to preserve deniability. But Clara Whitmore smiled, and the expression transformed her face from merely striking to genuinely beautiful. Then I'll hope for coincidence, she said. Rhett mounted Ash, feeling the familiar comfort of leather and horse beneath him. From this vantage, Clara had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes, and he saw the moment she registered the sheer size of him, 6'3" of weathered muscle and quiet menace. Most women found it intimidating. She found it interesting. 6 o'clock, she repeated. Thank you, Mr. Callahan. He touched the brim of his hat, an acknowledgement, not quite a promise, and urged Ash into motion. As they left Stillwater behind, climbing into the foothills where his ranch waited, Rhett tried to convince himself that tomorrow would find him too busy to ride into town. Tried and failed. Because something had shifted when Clara Whitmore looked at him with gratitude and challenge in equal measure. Something he'd thought buried so deep it could never surface. Curiosity. Interest. The first hairline crack in walls built over decades. And Rhett Callahan, who prided himself on control, on discipline, on never allowing vulnerability to touch him, felt the faint tremor of fear that maybe, just maybe, his carefully constructed solitude was about to face its first real test. The ranch house sat empty and silent when he returned, exactly as he'd left it. No warm lights in the windows. No voice calling welcome. No life except his own and the animals he tended. Rhett unsaddled Ash, brushed her down with methodical care, and ensured she had feed and water before addressing his own needs. The rhythm of it soothed, predictable, controllable, requiring nothing except competence. Inside, he built a fire against the mountain cold, heated beans and bacon in a cast-iron skillet, and ate standing at the window watching darkness swallow the land. Tomorrow, he'd ride into town. Not because Clara Whitmore had invited him, not because her eyes had looked at him and seen something worth knowing, just because he needed more supplies. That was all. He repeated this lie until sleep finally claimed him, and in his dreams, he heard his father's voice asking the question that had haunted Rhett since childhood. What are you so afraid of, son? The answer, as always, remained the same. Everything. The morning sun crept through the window like an unwelcome guest, dragging Rhett from a sleep that had offered no rest. He'd spent the night locked in a familiar battle, telling himself he wouldn't go to town, knowing he would, hating himself for the weakness even as he planned the route. By noon, the pretense had grown thin enough to see through. He rode out under a sky so blue it hurt to look at, Ash moving beneath him with the easy confidence of a horse who knew exactly where they were headed. The fence supplies from yesterday sat untouched in his barn. Jake had given him a knowing look when Rhett announced he'd be gone for the evening, but the foreman was smart enough not to comment. The miles between the ranch and Stillwater passed in silence, broken only by hoofbeats and wind. Rhett tried to examine what he was doing with the cold logic that usually governed his decisions, but the harder he looked, the less sense it made. Clara Whitmore was nothing to him. A stranger. An Eastern woman playing at frontier life who'd be gone within a year when reality stripped away her romantic notions. Except she hadn't looked romantic standing in that mud, checking Emma for injuries with hands that knew what they were doing. She'd looked competent, fierce, like someone who'd chosen this life with eyes open and intended to see it through. That was the dangerous part. Stillwater materialized in the valley below, and Rhett felt his jaw tighten. He was still 20 minutes early, which meant he'd ridden faster than intended, which meant some part of him, the part he couldn't control, couldn't discipline into submission, actually wanted this. The realization sat in his stomach like bad whiskey. He stabled Ash at Morrison's livery, paying the stable boy extra to brush her down proper. Then he stood in the lengthening shadows, watching the hotel entrance across the street, debating whether to walk through those doors or mount up and ride home. The decision was made for him when Clara Whitmore stepped out onto the hotel's front porch, saw him standing there, and smiled. Not a polite smile, not a grateful smile. Something genuine that reached her eyes and made the rapidly cooling air feel several degrees warmer. Rhett crossed the street because turning around now would be more conspicuous than following through. "Mr. Callahan," Clara said as he approached. "I was beginning to think coincidence had abandoned me." "Almost did." The honesty seemed to surprise her, but she recovered quickly. "Well, I'm glad it reconsidered. Shall we?" She gestured toward the entrance, and Rhett realized she expected him to escort her inside. The social niceties of it grated against every instinct that told him to maintain distance, but he offered his arm because refusing seemed crueler than complying. Her hand settled light on his forearm, proper and formal, yet he felt the touch through 2 layers of fabric like a brand. The hotel restaurant occupied the building's entire first floor, attempting elegance with white tablecloths and actual napkins. It was the closest thing Stillwater had to fine dining, which wasn't saying much, but Clara had clearly chosen it deliberately. A statement, perhaps, or maybe just the best available option. Every head in the room turned when they entered. Rhett felt the weight of those stares, the speculation, the gossip already forming, the way Marcus Webb's jaw tightened from his corner table. He'd known this would happen, but knowing and experiencing were different animals. Clara seemed oblivious, or perhaps just accustomed to attention. She moved through the room with the confidence of someone who'd spent her life in spaces where people watched and judged, leading them to a table by the window that overlooked Main Street. "I hope you don't mind," she said as they sat. "I prefer watching the world move, as opposed to being watched by it." Her eyes flickered with amusement. "You noticed the stairs." "Hard not to." "Does it bother you?" Rhett considered the question while the waiter, a nervous young man named Timothy, appeared to take their order. Clara requested the roasted chicken with vegetables. Rhett ordered steak, rare, and coffee, strong enough to strip paint. When Timothy retreated, Rhett answered honestly, "Yes." "Why?" "Because I came here to eat dinner, not provide entertainment." "Then perhaps we should give them something worth watching." Clara leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice to conspiratorial levels. "We could argue loudly. I could throw water in your face. You could storm out. That would fuel gossip for months." Despite himself, Rhett felt the corner of his mouth twitch. "You have a strange sense of humor, Miss Whitmore." "Clara, please. And I find humor necessary for survival, in places that take themselves too seriously." She settled back in her chair, studying him with that direct gaze that seemed to peel away pretense. "Tell me, Mr. Callahan." "Rhett." "Rhett," she amended, and his name and her voice sounded different somehow. "How long have you been in Montana?" 16 years. "Did you come alone?" "Yes." "From where?" "East." "Like you." Clara smiled. "That's deliberately vague." "It's also all you're getting." Instead of being offended, she looked delighted. "A man of mystery. How refreshing. Most people can't wait to tell me their entire life story." "Most people are lonely." "And you're not?" The question landed with more weight than she probably intended. Rhett met her eyes, saw genuine curiosity there rather than judgment, and chose his words carefully. "I'm alone. That's different than lonely." "Is it?" "One's a choice. The other's a condition." Timothy returned with coffee and water, providing a natural break in the conversation. Clara added sugar to her cup with precise movements, stirring twice before tasting. Everything about her spoke of careful control, of discipline masking something else beneath. "You don't believe in small talk, do you?" she said after a moment. "I believe it's a waste of time." "What would you prefer to discuss?" "Nothing. I'm here to eat, not talk." Clara laughed. A real laugh, not the polite society version. "You really are determined to be difficult." "I'm determined to be honest." "Those aren't mutually exclusive, but very well. We'll eat in silence if that's what you prefer." She said it lightly, but Rhett caught the flash of disappointment beneath. He'd hurt her, however slightly, by refusing to engage. The realization bothered him more than it should have. "Why did you come here?" he heard himself ask. "To Stillwater. A woman with your education, your background, you could teach anywhere. Why the frontier?" The disappointment vanished, replaced by something fiercer. "Because everywhere else already knows what it wants to be. Here, things are still being decided. I can make a difference." "That's naive." "That's determined." The frontier doesn't care about determination. It breaks people. Clara's expression hardened. It breaks people who let it. I don't intend to be broken. Their food arrived, interrupting what was rapidly becoming an argument. Rhett cut into his steak with more force than necessary, irritated with himself for caring enough to debate. He should have stayed home, should have known better than to think he could sit across from this woman and remain unmoved. They ate in the silence Clara had offered, but it wasn't comfortable. It crackled with unspoken words, with challenge and retreat in equal measure. Finally, Clara set down her fork. I've offended you? No? Then I've disappointed you. Rhett looked up, startled by her perception. Why would you think that? Because you expected me to be like everyone else who comes out here with romantic notions and no practical understanding. You expected me to confirm your belief that people are weak and foolish and not worth knowing. The accuracy of it was unsettling. You don't know what I believe, don't I? Clara leaned forward, and there was steel in her voice now. You live alone on your ranch. You come to town only when necessary. You saved Emma yesterday, but you tried to leave before anyone could thank you. Everything about you screams isolation by design, not circumstance. So yes, Mr. Callahan, I think I know exactly what you believe. Then you know why I shouldn't be here. I know why you're afraid to be here. That's different. Rhett felt heat rise in his chest, anger, defensiveness, something darker. I'm not afraid of anything. Everyone's afraid of something. What are you afraid of? He shot back, voice low enough that nearby tables couldn't hear but sharp enough to draw blood. Clara didn't flinch. Wasting my life on safety. Reaching the end and realizing I never risked anything that mattered. That I played by rules designed to keep me small and acceptable and invisible. The honesty of it hit like a punch. Rhett had expected deflection, maybe embarrassment. Not this raw admission that mirrored his own fears in reverse, hers of not connecting, his of connecting too much. That's why I came here, Clara continued, voice softer now. Because Philadelphia had my entire life mapped out. Marry well, manage a household, attend the right parties, say the right things. Die having never made a mark on anything except seating charts and menu cards. So you ran away. I chose differently. She held his gaze. Just like you chose isolation. We're not so different, Rhett. We both looked at what we were offered and decided it wasn't enough. Rhett wanted to argue, to point out the vast distance between her choices and his, but the words wouldn't come. Because she was right. In the way that made his chest tight and his defenses feel suddenly inadequate. The difference, he managed, is that you're trying to build something. I'm just trying to survive. Are you? Because from where I'm sitting, survival looks a lot like dying slowly. The words should have enraged him. Instead, they settled into his bones with the weight of truth he'd been avoiding for 16 years. You don't know anything about me, he said, but the protest was weak. I know you saved a child without hesitation. I know you keep your word even when it costs you comfort. I know you're sitting here having dinner with me despite every instinct telling you to run. Clara's expression softened. And I know you're terrified of whatever it is you feel right now. Rhett stood abruptly, chair scraping against wood. Every eye in the room swiveled toward them, but he didn't care. He couldn't breathe properly, couldn't think, couldn't... Rhett, Clara's voice, calm and certain. Sit down, please. He should leave, should walk out and never look back, should prove her wrong about every assumption she'd made. Instead, he sat. Clara reached across the table, not quite touching him, but close enough that he felt the intention. I'm not asking for anything. I'm just saying that you don't have to carry whatever burden you're carrying alone, not unless you choose to. I do choose to. Then I respect that choice. But I also refuse to pretend I don't see what it's costing you. Rhett closed his eyes briefly, marshaling control that felt increasingly fragile. When he opened them, Clara was still there, still watching him with that mix of compassion and challenge that made him want to trust her even as every survival instinct screamed danger. My father loved my mother, he said, the words escaping before he could stop them. Loved her so much that when she died, he couldn't function, couldn't eat, couldn't work, couldn't see anything except what he'd lost. He lasted 3 years before his heart gave out, but he'd been dead since the day we buried her. Clara listened without interruption, her face reflecting understanding rather than pity. I was 12 when she died, 15 when we buried him, and I swore I would never let anyone matter that much. Never give anyone the power to destroy me. And you've kept that promise. Yes. At what cost? Rhett looked away, toward the window where darkness had fully claimed the street. At whatever cost necessary. For a long moment, neither spoke. The restaurant's ambient noise, conversations, clinking silverware, Timothy's nervous footsteps filled the space between them. Then Clara said quietly, "My mother died when I was 16. Consumption. I watched her waste away over 2 years. Watched my father maintain his distance because emotion was unseemly. Watched my siblings pretend it wasn't happening because acknowledging death was impolite." She paused. When she finally passed, we had a beautiful funeral with all the proper rituals. Everyone said the right things, and then we went home and never spoke of her again. Rhett turned back, surprised by the parallel. "I learned that there are different kinds of dying," Clara continued. "The physical kind, yes, but also the kind where you're so afraid of pain that you stop living. My father chose safety over everything. He's still alive, technically, but he died the same day my mother did. He just hasn't had the decency to stop breathing. So you chose the opposite. I chose to live while I'm alive, to risk pain because the alternative is feeling nothing at all." Their eyes met, and Rhett felt something shift, not breaking, not opening, but acknowledging. She'd offered him a piece of her story equal to what he'd shared, creating balance where none had existed. "You think I'm a coward," he said. "I think you're protecting yourself the only way you know how. But yes, I also think you're dying the same way my father is, slowly, safely, alone." The brutal honesty of it should have sent him storming out. Instead, it anchored him to the chair, to this moment, to this woman who refused to let him hide behind walls he'd spent 16 years building. "What do you want from me, Clara?" She smiled, sad and knowing. "I want you to consider the possibility that you're wrong. That love didn't kill your father, the loss did. And that maybe, just maybe, the risk is worth it. It's not. How do you know? When's the last time you tried?" Rhett had no answer for that. Timothy appeared with the check, sensing the heaviness of the conversation and wisely staying silent. Rhett paid, ignoring Clara's protest, and they stood, the evening clearly over. Outside, the night air hit crisp and clean, washing away some of the intensity that had built between them. Clara wrapped her shawl tighter against the cold, and Rhett fell into step beside her as they walked the short distance to the boarding house where she lived. "I'm sorry if I pushed too hard," Clara said as they reached her door. "It's a failing of mine. I see something worth fighting for, and I can't help but fight." "Is that what I am? Something worth fighting for?" She turned to face him fully, and in the moonlight her features held a softness that contrasted with the steel he'd seen at dinner. "I think you're someone worth knowing, whether you believe that about yourself or not." Rhett studied her, this impossible woman who'd appeared in his carefully ordered life and immediately begun dismantling it. He should say goodnight, should leave, should retreat to the safety of his ranch and never see her again except in passing. Instead, he heard himself say, "I teach shooting on Sundays, out at my ranch. If you're going to live on the frontier, you should know how to handle a gun." Clara's eyes widened slightly. "Is that an invitation?" "It's practical advice." "Practical advice that happens to include visiting your ranch?" "You can bring your moralizing friend Webb if it makes you feel safer." She laughed. "Marcus isn't my friend. He's a persistent annoyance who thinks a woman alone needs constant protecting." "Smart man." "Arrogant man," Clara corrected. "But I appreciate the offer." "Sunday, you said?" "Noon. Bring pants if you own them. Skirts are dangerous around horses and guns." "I'll manage." She extended her hand, formal again. "Thank you for dinner, Rhett, and for the conversation." He took her hand, meaning to shake it and release. But her grip was warm and solid and real in a way that made him hesitate. For just a moment, they stood connected by something as simple as clasped hands, and Rhett felt the earth tilt beneath him. Then he let go, stepped back, and touched his hat brim. "Good night, Miss Whitmore." "Clara," she reminded him. "Clara." He walked away before he could do something foolish, like stay. Behind him, he heard her door open and close, and only then did he allow himself to breathe. The ride back to the ranch passed in a blur. Ash knew the way, following familiar trails while Rhett's mind churned through everything that had happened. He'd shared more with Clara in 2 hours than he'd shared with anyone in 16 years, had admitted fears he barely acknowledged to himself, had invited her to his sanctuary, the one place he'd kept completely separate from other people. What the hell was he doing? The question followed him into sleep and waited when he woke, no closer to being answered. Sunday arrived wrapped in clear skies and unseasonable warmth. Rhett spent the morning preparing, setting up targets, checking weapons, trying to convince himself this was purely practical. Clara needed to learn to shoot. He happened to be competent with firearms. Nothing more complicated than that. The lie tasted bitter, even as he told it. At exactly noon, he heard hoofbeats approaching. Rhett stepped out of the barn to find Clara riding a borrowed mare with surprising competence, wearing split skirts and a practical jacket that suggested she'd taken his advice seriously. "You can actually ride," he said as she dismounted. "I'm full of surprises." She handed him the reins, trusting him to handle her horse. "Beautiful property. How much land?" 4,300 acres. Clara whistled low. "That's substantial. It's defensible." She caught the phrasing, the military precision of it, but didn't comment. Instead, she followed him to where he'd set up the shooting range, studying everything with the same focused attention she'd given him at dinner. Rhett handed her a rifle, a Winchester repeater, reliable and not too heavy. "Ever handled a gun?" "My brother taught me to shoot clay pigeons. Once. 8 years ago." "Better than nothing. Let me see your stance." Clara positioned herself, attempting to remember lessons long forgotten. Her form was terrible, shoulders too tense, grip too tight, feet poorly placed, but she was trying, and there was something appealing about her determination. "Here." Rhett stepped closer, adjusting her shoulders. "You're fighting the weapon. Let it become part of you." His hands on her shoulders, his body close enough to feel her heat. It was professional instruction that felt anything but professional. Clara seemed to sense it too, her breathing changing slightly as he corrected her position. "Like this?" she asked, voice steadier than it should have been. "Better. Now sight down the barrel. See the target?" "Yes." "Breathe in, exhale halfway. On the empty, squeeze, don't pull." She fired. The shot went wide by a foot, but it hit the backstop instead of disappearing into the trees. Progress. Again. They spent the next hour in rhythm. Clara shooting, Rhett correcting, both of them circling something neither wanted to name. She improved quickly, natural talent emerging once her form corrected. By the 20th round, she was hitting the target consistently. "You're good at this," Rhett said, genuinely impressed. "I have a good teacher. You have the instinct for it." "That's different." Clara lowered the rifle, turning to face him. Sweat dampened her hairline despite the cool air, and her eyes shone with accomplishment. "This is what you do out here? Alone?" "This and ranching. No one to talk to, no one to share it with." "That's the point. Is it satisfying?" Rhett considered lying, considered deflecting, but Clara had given him honesty and something in him wanted to return it. "It's safe." "Safe isn't the same as satisfying." "It's enough." "Is it?" She set the rifle down carefully, watching him. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've built a beautiful prison." "Then stop standing there." The words came out harsher than intended, but Clara didn't retreat. Instead, she stepped closer, closing the distance he'd been carefully maintaining. "Make me," she said softly. Rhett's control, already frayed, snapped. He kissed her, hard and desperate, and completely improper. His hands found her waist, pulling her against him, and Clara met him with equal ferocity, her fingers tangling in his hair. It lasted 10 seconds, maybe less. Then reality crashed back, and Rhett released her, stumbling backward like he'd been burned. That was... He stopped, having no words for what that was. Clara touched her lips, eyes wide but not frightened. "Unexpected. I'm sorry." "Don't be." She straightened her jacket, composure returning. "But we should probably talk about it." "There's nothing to talk about." "Rhett, this was a mistake." He was already moving toward the barn, toward Ash, toward escape. "I'll saddle your horse. You should go." Running away doesn't change what just happened. "Watch me." But before he could retreat fully, Clara caught his arm. The touch stopped him cold, every nerve aware of her hand on his sleeve. "I'm not afraid of this," she said, Whatever it is you're feeling, whatever scared you into kissing me and then running, I'm not afraid of it. Then you're a fool. Maybe. But I'd rather be a fool who feels something than a coward who feels nothing. The word, coward, hit like she'd slapped him. Rhett turned, anger and fear and want tangling into something he couldn't untangle. You don't know what you're asking. I'm not asking for anything except honesty. Do you feel something for me? No. Clara's expression didn't change. You're lying. Yes, he admitted, the truth ripping out of him. And that terrifies me more than anything I've ever faced. Why? Because people leave. They die, they change, they disappoint, and the ones you love the most destroy you the deepest. Or, Clara said quietly, they give your life meaning, purpose, reasons beyond simple survival. I watched my father die from losing someone he loved. I won't become that. You won't become anything if you never try. They stood locked in deadlock. Two people wounded by loss, choosing opposite strategies for survival. Rhett wanted to believe her, wanted to think that risk could lead to reward rather than ruin. But 16 years of discipline couldn't dissolve in one afternoon, no matter how much his body still hummed from that kiss. I need you to leave, he said finally. Clara studied him for a long moment, and he watched her make a choice, saw her decide something that shifted in her expression from challenge to acceptance. All right, she said, I'll go. But Rhett, this conversation isn't finished. Yes, it is. No, it's just beginning. She walked to her horse, mounted with practiced ease, and looked down at him from the saddle. In the afternoon light, she was beautiful and fierce, and everything he couldn't allow himself to want. Thank you for the lesson, Clara said. I'll see you in town. Then she rode away, leaving Rhett standing in the dust, his world tilted on an axis that felt increasingly unstable. He spent the rest of the day working until exhaustion made thinking impossible. But that night, alone in his house, Rhett lay awake remembering the feel of Clara in his arms, the taste of her lips, the way she'd looked at him like he was worth saving. And for the first time in 16 years, he wondered if maybe, just maybe, she was right. The days that followed stretched like barbed wire, taut, sharp, cutting into Rhett's carefully maintained equilibrium. He threw himself into ranch work with the kind of intensity that made Jake exchange worried glances with the other hands, but no one dared comment. Rhett mended fences that didn't need mending, broke horses already broken, rode property lines until Ash's breathing came hard and his own muscles screamed for rest. None of it helped, because every night, alone in the darkness of his bedroom, he felt Clara's mouth against his, heard her voice asking if he felt something, remembered the way she'd called him a coward and been absolutely, devastatingly right. 2 weeks passed. He didn't go to town. 3 weeks. Jake started making supply runs without being asked. 4 weeks, and Rhett was standing in his barn at midnight, unable to sleep, when he heard a horse approaching fast. Too fast for a casual visit. His hand went automatically to the rifle hanging by the door. The rider materialized out of darkness. Young Tommy Chen from the livery, barely 16, his face pale even in moonlight. Mr. Callahan! The boy nearly fell dismounting. You gotta come! Miss Whitmore, there's trouble! Rhett's blood turned to ice. What kind of trouble? Men came to the schoolhouse. Drunk. Angry about something she taught the kids. They're threatening to burn it down with her inside if she doesn't leave town. The rifle was in Rhett's hands before conscious thought caught up. How many men? 4, maybe 5. Mr. Webb tried talking to them, but they just laughed. Sheriff Morrison's out of town and Deputy Hayes is... Tommy swallowed. He's scared, Mr. Callahan. Says it's not worth getting killed over a school teacher who should have stayed east. Rhett was already saddling Ash, movements precise despite the rage building in his chest. Where's Jake? I'll get him. No time. Ride back. Tell anyone sober and armed to meet me at the schoolhouse. Move. Tommy scrambled back onto his horse and kicked it into a gallop. Rhett followed 30 seconds later, pushing Ash harder than he should have, but unable to care. The miles between his ranch and Stillwater blurred into a single tunnel of focus. Clara trapped, Clara threatened, Clara facing down drunk men with violence in their eyes and nothing but her convictions as shield. He should have seen this coming. Should have known that a woman challenging the established order would provoke this kind of response. The frontier didn't reward change. It punished it. The ride took 20 minutes that felt like hours. As Rhett crested the final hill overlooking Stillwater, he saw orange light flickering from the schoolhouse at the edge of town. Not burning yet, but torches. Men surrounding the building, their shadows grotesque against the walls. Rhett didn't slow down, didn't announce himself. He rode straight into the cluster of men, scattering them like startled crows, and pulled Ash to a rearing stop directly in front of the schoolhouse door. "Back up," he said, voice carrying the kind of quiet that preceded violence. "Now." The men regrouped, 5 of them, ranging from early 20s to graying 40s. Rhett recognized them. Ranch hands from the Morrison spread, good workers when sober, mean drunks when not. The ringleader was Hank Morrison, the owner's nephew, a man with more muscles than sense and a reputation for solving problems with fists. "This ain't your business, Callahan," Hank slurred, swaying on his feet. "That woman in there's been filling kids' heads with ideas, teaching them things they got no business knowing." "Like what? Reading? Like questioning their elders? Like thinking they're better than what they are?" Hank spat into the dirt. "My uncle's boy came home asking why we don't pay workers more. Where you think he got that?" "From having a functioning brain." Laughter rippled through the group, but Hank's face darkened. "You defending her? I'm telling you to leave." "Or what?" Rhett levered around into the rifle's chamber, the sound sharp in the night air. "Or I stop asking nicely." The men shifted, uncertainty replacing bravado. They'd expected opposition maybe, but not this. Not Rhett Callahan appearing like an avenging shadow with death in his hands and ice in his eyes. "There's 5 of us," Hank said, but his voice wavered. "There's 1 of me with a repeating rifle and the high ground. Do the math." Behind him, the schoolhouse door opened. Clara stood silhouetted in lamplight, her hair disheveled, face pale but composed. She held a shotgun with both hands, barrel pointed skyward, but ready. 6 shots in this rifle," Rhett continued, not turning. 10 in her shotgun. That's 16 rounds between 5 targets. Someone's getting hit twice. The cold arithmetic of it penetrated even whiskey-soaked brains. Men exchanged glances, courage leaking away like water from cracked pottery. "This ain't over," Hank muttered. "Yes," Rhett said quietly. "It is. You touch her. You touch the schoolhouse. You so much as look at her wrong, you answer to me. Understand?" No response. "I said, do you understand?" Grudging nods. Muttered agreement. The men backed away, then turned and stumbled toward Main Street and the saloon that had fueled this stupidity. Rhett stayed mounted, rifle ready, until they disappeared into darkness. Only then did he dismount, legs unsteady from adrenaline crash. He turned to find Clara lowering the shotgun, hands shaking now that danger had passed. "Are you hurt?" His voice came out rougher than intended. "No, just scared." She managed a weak smile. "That shotgun isn't even loaded. I couldn't find the shells." Despite everything, the fear, the anger, the residual violence humming in his veins, Rhett almost laughed. "You faced down 5 drunk men with an empty gun?" "I faced them down with a loaded argument. The gun was just set dressing." Clara leaned the weapon against the doorframe. "Thank you for coming. I wasn't sure anyone would." Tommy Chen rode out. "Good kid." "I'll have to thank him." She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly looking fragile in a way she never had before. "They were serious, Rhett, about burning it down, about making me leave." The use of his first name, the tremor in her voice, it cracked something in his chest. Before conscious decision intervened, he'd crossed the distance between them and pulled her into his arms. Clara buried her face against his shoulder and shook. Not crying exactly, just releasing the terror she'd held contained while danger loomed. "You're safe," Rhett murmured into her hair. "I won't let them touch you." "You can't watch me every moment." "Then you're leaving. Tomorrow. I'll arrange passage back east and—" Clara pulled back, eyes blazing. "Absolutely not. They threatened to kill you. They threatened to scare me. There's a difference. Not a meaningful one. It's the only one that matters." She stepped out of his embrace, spine straightening, the steel returning. "I'm not running because angry men don't like what I teach. That's exactly why I need to stay. That's exactly why you need to leave before they make good on those threats. So they win. They burn down progress because change frightens them, and we just accept it? We accept that your life is worth more than a building, Clara's expression softened. Do you know what I was teaching when Hank's nephew asked about wages? Arithmetic, basic mathematics. I used real examples because that's how children learn. If a ranch hand works 60 hours a week at 20 cents an hour, how much should he earn? That's it. That's the dangerous idea that provoked this. Education scares people who benefit from ignorance. Exactly. Which is why I can't leave. Rhett wanted to argue, to force sense into her through sheer will, but he recognized the futility. Clara Whitmore possessed the same stubborn conviction that made men build homesteads in hostile territory and women cross continents alone. You couldn't reason with it. You could only decide whether to support it or get out of the way. Then you're not staying here alone, he said. Pack what you need. You're coming to the ranch. I can't possibly. You can and you will. At least until this settles down and we figure out how to keep you safe. Rhett, that's not appropriate. My reputation, your reputation matters less than your skull staying intact. He gentled his tone. Please, Clara, let me do this one thing. She studied him in the lamplight, seeing past the command to the plea underneath. For how long? As long as it takes. The children need their teacher. They need their teacher alive. We'll figure out the rest. Clara wavered, clearly torn between principle and practicality. Finally, she nodded. 1 week. If things haven't calmed by then, we reassess. Fair enough. They worked in synchronized silence, Clara gathering clothes and books while Rhett secured the schoolhouse and doused lights. Within 20 minutes, she sat behind him on Ash, arms wrapped around his waist, her small traveling bag strapped to the saddle. The ride to the ranch passed in darkness, broken by stars so bright they seemed close enough to touch. Clara's body pressed against his back radiated warmth, and Rhett was acutely aware of every breath she took, every small adjustment of her grip. I didn't expect you to come, she said quietly, voice nearly lost in wind and hoofbeats. I didn't expect to care. But you do. It wasn't a question, but Rhett answered anyway. Yes. Clara's arms tightened slightly. What changed? Nothing. Everything. He paused, choosing words carefully. I kissed you and spent 4 weeks trying to convince myself it meant nothing. Then Tommy said you were in danger, and I was on my horse before my brain caught up to my body. That's what changed. I stopped lying to myself about what I feel. And what do you feel? Terrified. Her soft laugh ghosted against his neck. At least you're honest. Honesty's all I have left. Everything else is just wreckage. They crested the final rise and the ranch spread below, dark buildings against darker land, but familiar. Safe. Rhett guided Ash to the barn, helped Clara dismount, and began the automatic ritual of unsaddling and caring for his horse. Clara watched from the doorway, and when he finished, she was still there, patient and present. Come on, Rhett said. I'll show you where you'll sleep. The house felt different with another person inside it, smaller somehow, the silence less peaceful than oppressive. Rhett led Clara to the guest room, rarely used, furnished with basics and little else. It's not much, he apologized. It's perfect. Clara set her bag on the bed, looking around with genuine appreciation. Thank you, Rhett. For tonight. For this. You're welcome. They stood in the doorway, the moment stretching awkward and charged in equal measure. Finally, Rhett stepped back. Get some rest. We'll talk in the morning about how to handle this. Rhett? He paused, hand on the door. You said you stopped lying to yourself about what you feel, but you never actually said what that is. The question hung between them, demanding honesty he wasn't sure he could give. Rhett met her eyes, saw the vulnerability beneath the challenge, and found himself answering with truth instead of deflection. I feel like I'm standing at the edge of a cliff. Like one more step forward, and I'm in free fall with no idea if there's ground below or just empty air. And that terrifies you. Yes. Clara crossed the room slowly, each step deliberate, until she stood close enough that he could see flecks of gold in her dark eyes. What if I told you I'm standing on the same cliff? That I'm just as scared? I'd say you're braver than me. You've been ready to jump since we met. Not ready. Willing. There's a difference. She reached up, hand settling gently against his chest, right over his heart. I don't know what happens if we do this. I don't know if it works or if it destroys us both, but I know that spending my life wondering feels worse than trying and failing. Rhett covered her hand with his, feeling his pulse hammer against their joined palms. I'm not good at this, at letting people close, at being what someone needs. I'm not asking you to be anything except honest. Can you do that? I can try. Then try. The kiss this time was different, slower, deliberate, instead of desperate. Rhett cupped her face with both hands, learning the shape of her, the taste of her, the way she made a small sound when his thumb traced her cheekbone. Clara's hand slid up his chest to his shoulders, anchoring herself against him. When they finally separated, both breathing hard, Rhett rested his forehead against hers. This is a terrible idea, he whispered. Probably. We barely know each other. So we'll learn. I'm going to hurt you, not intentionally, but I will. I'm broken in ways I don't even understand yet. Clara pulled back just enough to meet his eyes. I'm not asking for perfect, Rhett. I'm asking for honest. For real. For someone who sees me as I am and doesn't run from it. I've been running my whole life. Then maybe it's time to stand still. The simplicity of it, the impossible, terrifying simplicity, made something crack in Rhett's chest. 16 years of walls, of discipline, of choosing isolation over risk. All of it fracturing under the weight of one woman's steady conviction that he was worth the effort. Stay with me tonight, he heard himself say. I don't mean... He stopped, frustrated with his own inability to articulate. I just don't want to be alone. Clara's smile was tender. Neither do I. They settled in his room instead of hers, his bed larger, his space somehow feeling right for this fragile new thing between them. Clara borrowed one of his shirts to sleep in, the fabric swallowing her frame, and Rhett tried not to think about how right she looked wearing his clothes in his space. They lay facing each other in darkness, the bed both vast and impossibly intimate. Tell me something true, Clara said softly. Something you've never told anyone. Rhett considered deflecting, but she'd asked for honesty. Sometimes I walk my property line and imagine what it would be like to just keep walking, to leave everything behind and start over somewhere no one knows my name or my history. Why don't you? Because running doesn't solve anything. It just relocates the problems. That's very wise for someone who claims to be broken. Broken things can still see clearly. Sometimes clearer because we're already shattered. We don't have illusions left to protect. Clara reached across the space between them, fingers finding his in the darkness. Tell me another truth. I'm terrified that this, you and me, will be the thing that finally breaks me past repair. And I'm going to try anyway. Her grip tightened. Thank you. For what? For being brave enough to be scared? That's harder than it sounds. They lay in silence after that, hands linked, breathing gradually synchronizing. Rhett felt the strangeness of another person in his bed, in his space, in his carefully controlled life. Felt the vulnerability of it, the risk. Felt the terror of caring whether she stayed or left. But underneath the fear, something else stirred. Something that might have been hope if he was brave enough to name it. Rhett? Clara's voice sleepy now. Yeah? I'm glad you came tonight. Me too. Even though it terrifies you? Especially because it terrifies me? He felt her smile against the darkness. Then maybe there's hope for you yet. Don't get carried away. But her faith, unearned and absolute, settled into his bones like warmth. And when sleep finally claimed them both, Rhett dreamed not of loss but of possibility. Of mornings waking to another person's breathing, of conversations over coffee, of building something that mattered beyond mere survival. Morning arrived with pale light through curtains Rhett rarely closed. He woke to find Clara still asleep beside him, hair spread across his pillow, face peaceful in a way it never was while conscious. The intimacy of watching her sleep made his chest tight. He slipped from bed carefully, not wanting to wake her, and started coffee in the kitchen. The familiar ritual soothed, measuring grounds, heating water, the rich smell filling the house. Outside he heard Jake and the other hands beginning their day, voices carrying across the yard. Mr. Callahan? Rhett turned to find Clara in the doorway, still wearing his shirt, hair tousled and eyes soft with sleep. She looked impossibly young, impossibly vulnerable, and impossibly beautiful. Coffee's almost ready, he said, voice rougher than intended. Can we talk about what happens next? Rhett poured 2 cups, handed her one, and leaned against the counter. We make sure you stay alive. Everything else is secondary. I can't hide on your ranch forever. You can until we deal with Morrison's men. And how do we deal with them? You can't threaten them into permanent submission. Watch me. Clara set her cup down with enough force to make a point. Violence isn't the answer. It's the only language they understand. Then we teach them a new language. She moved closer, conviction blazing. I'm not leaving Stillwater, Rhett. Those children need education, need someone fighting for them. If I run now, I'm proving that intimidation works. That angry men with torches can dictate who stays and who goes. You're also proving you value principle over survival. Some principles are worth dying for. Not to me. The words came out harsh, edged with the fear he couldn't quite contain. I won't watch you throw your life away for an ideal. Then help me find another way. Clara's hand found his chest again, that same spot over his heart. You're clever, Rhett. Strategic. There has to be a solution that doesn't involve me leaving or you shooting people. Rhett covered her hand, feeling his pulse race under their joined touch. She was right, damn her. Violence would only escalate the situation, prove to Morrison's faction that teachers from the East brought chaos, but letting Clara walk back into danger felt impossible. We get the town on your side, he said slowly, thinking through the angles. Right now, Morrison's men feel emboldened because they think they represent majority opinion. We change that opinion. How? You teach, publicly. Show parents what their children are learning, why it matters. Make education visible instead of mysterious. Clara's eyes lit with understanding. A demonstration. Let them see that arithmetic about wages isn't sedition. It's practical knowledge. Exactly. Hard to burn down a schoolhouse when the whole town's watching their kids learn useful skills. It could work, she paused, but it also puts me directly in public view. Makes me more visible, not less. Which is why I'll be there. Along with anyone else we can convince that education matters more than tradition. You do that? Stand publicly with me? Rhett hesitated because public declaration went against every instinct toward privacy and isolation. But Clara was looking at him with hope and challenge in equal measure, and he found himself nodding. Yes. Even though it associates you with the troublemaking Eastern school teacher? Especially because of that. Clara kissed him then, quick and fierce and full of gratitude. When she pulled back, her eyes shone. Thank you, she whispered. Don't thank me yet. This might not work. But we're trying. That's what matters. The rest of the morning passed in planning. Clara would return to town with Rhett that afternoon, visibly unintimidated. They'd announce the public demonstration for the following Saturday, giving parents a week to prepare and gossip to spread. Rhett would quietly spread word among the more reasonable ranchers and businessmen, building support. It was a risk, a calculated gamble that reason would triumph over fear, that community would choose progress over stagnation. But as Rhett watched Clara sketch out lesson plans with fierce determination, he realized something fundamental had shifted. He was no longer just protecting her. He was fighting beside her, choosing to stand for something beyond his own survival, choosing to hope despite every lesson life had taught him about hope's futility. They rode into Stillwater together that afternoon, Rhett on Ash, Clara on the borrowed mare. Eyes followed them down Main Street, curious, speculative, some hostile. Let them look. Let them wonder. Rhett kept his expression neutral, his posture relaxed, communicating through body language that he had nothing to hide and no fear of judgment. Clara rode with equal composure, back straight, chin up. Together, they presented a united front that said more than words could. At the schoolhouse, they found repairs needed. Windows broken in the night's chaos, door damaged. Rhett set to work immediately while Clara organized her classroom, and within an hour, others arrived to help. Tommy Chen with his father, the blacksmith Daniels with tools, even Marcus Webb, looking uncomfortable but determined. Heard what happened? Webb said, hammering boards into place. Can't say I approve of everything you teach, Miss Whitmore, but burning down schools crosses a line. Thank you, Marcus, Clara said warmly. They worked into evening, a community building something together. And when it was finished, windows repaired, door rehung, classroom restored, Rhett realized that this was what Clara had been talking about. This connection, this purpose, this choosing to build rather than isolate. It terrified him. It also felt more alive than anything he'd experienced in 16 years. As darkness fell and helpers dispersed, Clara walked Rhett to where Ash waited. "Will you come back tomorrow?" she asked. "I'm not letting you out of my sight until Saturday's demonstration." "That's very protective." "That's very practical." Clara smiled, rising on tiptoes to kiss his cheek. "Either way, I'm grateful." Rhett caught her hand before she could retreat. "Clara?" "Yes?" "I'm still terrified." "I know. But I'm staying anyway." Her smile widened, bright enough to rival the stars emerging overhead. "I know that too." He rode home through darkness, mind churning through plans and contingencies, trying to anticipate every way Saturday could go wrong. But underneath the worry, something else hummed, a cautious, fragile thing that might have been happiness if he let it grow. For the first time in 16 years, Rhett Callahan was choosing connection over isolation. The cliff edge beckoned. The drop still terrified him, but Clara was right there beside him, equally scared, equally willing. And somehow, that made all the difference. The week before Saturday's demonstration crawled by with the agonizing slowness of a wounded animal. Rhett spent his days splitting time between the ranch and town, refusing to leave Clara unprotected for long. Jake ran the operation with quiet competence, asking no questions about his boss's sudden preoccupation with the schoolteacher, though the knowing look spoke volumes. Nights were the hardest. Rhett would return to his empty house, remember the single morning he'd woken with Clara beside him, and feel the absence like a physical wound. He'd gotten a taste of what connection felt like, and now isolation tasted like ash. On Wednesday, he rode into town to find Clara surrounded by angry parents outside the schoolhouse. His hand went to his rifle before his brain registered that the anger wasn't directed at her. It was aimed at each other. "My boy needs to learn ranching, not fancy mathematics," a weathered woman named Sarah Hutchins was saying, arms crossed over her chest. "And mine needs to know how to calculate profit margins when he takes over our store," countered George Crawford, Silas's brother. "Miss Whitmore's teaching practical skills." "She's teaching them to question authority," Sarah shot back. Clara stood in the middle of the brewing argument, face calm but eyes tired. When she spotted Rhett, relief flickered across her features. "Folks," she said, voice cutting through the dispute with practiced clarity, "this is exactly why Saturday's demonstration matters. Come see what your children are actually learning instead of arguing about assumptions." "We know what you're teaching," Sarah said, asking questions about wages, about why things are the way they are. "That's dangerous thinking." "No," Clara replied with steel underneath the politeness. "Ignorance is dangerous. Knowledge is power. Knowledge is trouble when it makes people dissatisfied with their lot." Rhett dismounted, his presence immediately shifting the dynamic. People parted as he approached, wary respect in their expressions. "Mrs. Hutchins," he said evenly, "your oldest boy, Michael, isn't it, worked for me last summer?" Sarah's chin lifted defensively. "He did." "Good worker, smart kid. Figured out a better system for rotating pastures that saved me 3 days of labor." Rhett kept his tone conversational. "You know where he learned to think like that?" Silence. "School. Miss Whitmore taught him to analyze problems, look for patterns, apply logic. Those are the skills that'll keep your ranch profitable when you're too old to work it yourself." Sarah wavered, the fight draining from her posture. "I just don't want him getting ideas above his station." "Ideas aren't the enemy. Stupidity is," Rhett gentled his voice. "Come Saturday. Watch what she teaches. Then decide." The crowd murmured, some nodding, others still skeptical. But the immediate hostility had diffused. George Crawford clapped Rhett on the shoulder as people dispersed, gratitude clear in his expression. When they were alone, Clara sagged against the schoolhouse wall. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Again. You were handling it." I was about to lose my composure and say something regrettable. Rhett smiled despite himself. "Like what?" "Like asking Sarah if she'd prefer her son illiterate and helpless, or educated and capable." Clara rubbed her temples. "This is exhausting, Rhett. Every day it's something new. Every day I have to justify teaching children basic skills. That's the frontier. Change comes slow and fights every step." "I'm starting to understand why you chose isolation." The admission surprised him. "Second-guessing your choices?" "No, just acknowledging the cost. She met his eyes. Is it always this hard? Fighting for something you believe in? Usually harder. Encouraging. Rhett stepped closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. But it's also worth it. What you're doing matters, Clara. Those kids, they'll have opportunities their parents never dreamed of because you refuse to quit. And if Saturday goes badly, if Morrison's men show up with torches again, then I'll handle Morrison's men. Violence isn't, I know, but protection is. He touched her cheek briefly, thumb tracing the shadows under her eyes. You're fighting your battle with words and ideas. Let me fight mine with presence and deterrence. Deal? Clara leaned into the touch, just for a moment, before propriety reasserted itself and she stepped back. Deal. But Rhett, promise me something. What? Promise that if it gets too dangerous, truly dangerous, you'll get yourself out. I couldn't bear it if you got hurt because of me. The concern in her voice, the genuine fear for his safety, cracked something in his chest. When was the last time someone had worried about him? Cared whether he lived or died beyond the practical considerations of unpaid debts or unfinished business? I promise, he lied, because they both knew he'd walk through fire before he let anything happen to her. Clara saw through it, but didn't call him out. Instead, she squeezed his hand once, quick and fierce, then retreated into the schoolhouse to prepare tomorrow's lessons. Rhett stood in the street, watching her shadow move behind the windows, and felt the weight of responsibility settle across his shoulders. He'd taken on her safety as surely as if he'd sworn an oath. The realization should have terrified him. Instead, it felt right, purposeful, like he'd finally found something worth protecting beyond his own isolation. Thursday brought the first serious test of that commitment. Rhett was at Crawford's store, loading supplies, when Hank Morrison and two of his friends walked in. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Silas Crawford suddenly found urgent business in the back, leaving Rhett alone with men who'd threatened Clara just days ago. Callahan, Hank said, attempting casual and missing by a mile. Heard you've been spending time with the school teacher. Heard you've been drinking too much and making stupid decisions. Hank's friends tensed, but Hank himself laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. That's direct. I like that. So let's be direct. You backing her come Saturday? I am. Even though she's filling kids' heads with sedition? She's teaching mathematics and reading. If that threatens you, the problem isn't her. Hank's smile vanished. Careful, Callahan. You've got a nice ranch, good reputation. Be ashamed to damage that over some Eastern woman who will be gone in 6 months anyway. Rhett set down the bag of flour he'd been holding and turned to face Hank fully. Are you threatening me? I'm advising you, as someone who wants to see you keep what you've built. I appreciate the concern. Rhett's voice dropped to a register that made even Hank's friends step back. But here's some advice for you. Saturday, you and your boys stay away from that schoolhouse. You show up drunk, you show up armed, you show up at all with intentions that aren't pure curiosity, and we'll have a problem that won't end with conversation. You can't fight all of us. I won't have to. You really think you're the only ones who care about this? Half the town's kids are in that school. Their parents might not love everything Clara teaches, but they love their children more than they hate change. You touch her, you're not fighting me. You're fighting a community. It was a bluff, mostly. Rhett had no idea how many people would actually defend Clara if it came to violence. But Hank didn't know that, and uncertainty was its own weapon. This ain't over, Hank muttered, the same empty threat from before. It is if you're smart, which I'm increasingly doubting. Hank and his friends left, bravado crumbling into muttered curses. Silas emerged from the back, face pale. That was either very brave or very stupid, the shopkeeper said. Usually both. Rhett resumed loading supplies. But I meant what I said. Come Saturday, I need to know who's with us. With you and Miss Whitmore? With the idea that burning down schools is wrong regardless of what they teach. Silas considered this, decades of frontier pragmatism warring with basic decency. Finally, he nodded. I'll be there, and I'll bring my brother and his boys. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. If this goes sideways, we're all taking the risk. Then we better make sure it doesn't go sideways. Rhett finished his business and rode straight to the schoolhouse, where Clara was dismissing students for the day. The children scattered like startled quail, voices high and bright with the freedom of afternoon. Emma Brennan waved at Rhett as she passed, and he touched his hat brim in acknowledgement. When the last child had gone, Clara locked the door and turned to find Rhett waiting. "Trouble?" she asked, reading his expression. "Morrison," making threats disguised as friendly advice. Clara's jaw tightened. "What kind of threats?" "The vague kind. Implications that my reputation and ranch might suffer. That you'll be gone soon anyway, so why risk everything?" "And what did you say?" "That I'd risk it anyway." Clara crossed the distance between them in 3 strides and kissed him hard, hands fisting in his shirt. When she pulled back, her eyes blazed. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did." "Why?" Rhett cupped her face, thumbs tracing her cheekbones. "Because somewhere between saving Emma and right now, you stopped being a stranger and started being someone I can't imagine losing. Because when Tommy said you were in danger, I didn't think, I just moved. Because every instinct I've honed over 16 years is screaming at me to run, and I'm choosing to stay instead. That's the most you've said about your feelings since we met. Don't get used to it." Clara smiled, soft and genuine. "What if I want to?" "Then you're as crazy as me." "Probably." She sobered. "Saturday scares me, Rhett. Not the demonstration itself, but what it represents. If this works, we're declaring something, making a statement about who we are together. And if it doesn't work, then at least we tried." Rhett pulled her close, resting his chin on top of her head, breathing in the scent of chalk and lavender. "I'm not good at this. At being what someone needs, at promises and futures and all the things normal people do. I don't want normal. I want honest. Then honestly, I'm terrified that I'll fail you, that my damage will hurt you in ways I can't predict or prevent." Clara tilted her head back to meet his eyes. "And honestly, I'm terrified that you'll succeed in pushing me away because fear feels safer than risk. But I'm choosing to trust anyway." "Why?" "Because the alternative is dying alone, and I've seen what that looks like." Her expression hardened with old pain. "My father, remember? Living but not alive. I refuse to become that. What if we both get hurt anyway? Then at least we'll have tried. At least we'll have felt something real instead of just existing." The simple courage of it staggered him. Clara Whitmore, who'd lost her mother young, who'd watched love wither into formality, had somehow emerged believing connection was worth the risk, while he'd taken the same loss and built walls high enough to block out the sun. "You're braver than me," Rhett said quietly. "Or you're braver than you think." Clara kissed him gently. "Either way, we're in this together now, for better or worse." "That sounds like wedding vows." "Does it?" She smiled mysteriously. "Must be a coincidence." Rhett felt panic flutter in his chest before Clara laughed and stepped back. "Relax. I'm not proposing. Yet. Let's survive Saturday first." "Yet?" I said what I said. Despite the fear, despite the uncertainty, despite every reason to retreat, Rhett found himself smiling. "You're impossible. And you're stuck with me." "Apparently." They spent the evening preparing, Clara rehearsing her demonstration, Rhett cleaning weapons and making contingency plans. As darkness fell, he insisted on walking her to the boarding house, hyper-aware of every shadow, every sound. At her door, Clara paused. "Will you be here early Saturday?" "I'll be here before dawn." "That's excessive." "That's careful." "Rhett?" "Yeah?" "Thank you for being careful, for caring enough to worry." He kissed her forehead, a gesture of tenderness that surprised them both. "Get some sleep. Saturday's going to be long." "You too." But sleep proved elusive. Rhett lay awake in his empty house, running through scenarios, imagining everything that could go wrong. Morrison showing up armed, parents rejecting Clara's teaching, the community turning hostile. His mind conjured disasters with vivid clarity. Around midnight, he gave up on rest and started writing. Not a letter exactly, more like documentation. His will, such as it was. Instructions for Jake about the ranch. And a letter to Clara that he hoped she'd never have to read, explaining everything he couldn't say while breathing. Dawn found him on Ash, riding toward town while stars still glittered overhead. The world felt suspended between darkness and light, holding its breath for whatever came next. Stillwater was silent when he arrived, but Rhett could feel the town waking. Smoke beginning to rise from chimneys, shadows moving behind curtained windows. the slow gathering of energy before Saturday's reckoning. Clara emerged from the boarding house as the sun crested the horizon, catching her face in golden light. She carried a basket of teaching materials and wore determination like armor. "You're early," she said. "Told you I would be. And I told you it was excessive." "Yet here you are, just as early," Clara smiled. "Couldn't sleep." "Me neither." They walked to the schoolhouse together, boots crunching on frost-hardened ground. Inside, Clara began arranging the space, setting up demonstrations, organizing materials, transforming the classroom into a stage for education's defense. Rhett watched her work with quiet admiration, every movement purposeful, every choice deliberate. This was Clara in her element, not fighting, exactly, but claiming her ground with absolute certainty. "What can I do to help?" he asked. "Just be here. That's enough." So he settled near the door, rifle within reach but not visible, and waited for Stillwater to wake fully. People began arriving around 9. First the curious, children dragging parents, families who wanted to see what all the fuss was about. Then the cautious, businessmen like George Crawford and Marcus Webb, invested in the community's future but wary of choosing sides. By 10, the schoolhouse was packed. Standing room only, people pressed shoulder to shoulder, tension thick enough to slice. Rhett positioned himself where he could see both Clara and the entrance, every sense alert for trouble. Clara stood at the front of the room, calm despite every eye fixed on her. When she spoke, her voice carried clear and confident. "Thank you all for coming. I know there's been controversy about what I teach your children. Today, I want to show you exactly what happens in this classroom. No secrets, no agenda beyond preparing your sons and daughters for the world they'll inherit." She gestured to Emma Brennan and 2 other students, Michael Hutchins and a girl named Rose Chen. "These 3 will demonstrate different lessons. Watch, ask questions, judge for yourselves." Emma went first, solving arithmetic problems about measuring fabric for dresses, practical mathematics that any shopkeeper's daughter would need. Michael followed with land surveying calculations, using geometry to determine property boundaries. Rose demonstrated reading comprehension, analyzing a passage about agricultural techniques. Each demonstration was deliberately practical, rooted in real frontier challenges, nothing theoretical, nothing that couldn't be directly applied to daily life. The crowd watched in silence, skepticism gradually giving way to interest. Rhett saw Sarah Hutchins lean forward when Michael explained his calculations, pride flickering across her weathered face despite her earlier opposition. Then Clara opened for questions. "Miss Whitmore," called a rancher named Peterson. "This all seems reasonable. So where's the controversy?" "The controversy," Clara said carefully, "comes when children apply these skills to questions adults find uncomfortable. For example, Michael learned surveying and then asked why certain property lines favor larger landowners. That's not sedition, that's observation based on mathematics." "But it causes dissatisfaction," Sarah Hutchins said, standing. "Makes people question the natural order." "The natural order," Clara replied gently, "is change. Questioning leads to understanding. Understanding leads to improvement. Would you rather your children inherit a world exactly like this one, with all its flaws and injustices, or would you rather they have the tools to build something better?" Silence. Then Michael Hutchins himself spoke up, voice cracking with adolescent uncertainty, but eyes determined. "Ma, I don't want to just survive. I want to build something that lasts, something I can be proud of. Miss Whitmore is teaching me how." Sarah's face crumpled. "I just want you safe, boy." "I know, but safe and dead inside aren't the same thing." The words hung in the air, and Rhett felt them resonate in his chest. How many years had he confused survival with living? How long had he chosen safety over meaning? Clara caught his eye across the crowded room, and he saw understanding there. She knew exactly what Michael meant. So did Rhett. So did anyone who'd ever built walls to keep pain out and accidentally trapped themselves inside. The demonstration continued for another hour. More examples, more questions, more gradual acceptance that education wasn't the enemy. Ignorance was. By noon, even Sarah Hutchins was nodding along, her resistance crumbling under the weight of evidence that her son was learning valuable skills, not dangerous ideas. That's when Hank Morrison arrived. The door banged open, and Hank stumbled in with 3 of his friends, all reeking of whiskey, despite the early hour. The crowd shifted, parents instinctively moving children behind them. Well, well, Hank slurred, swaying on his feet. Whole town's here watching the schoolmarm put on a show. Rhett moved before conscious thought, positioning himself between Hank and Clara. You're drunk. Leave. Or what? You'll shoot me in front of all these witnesses? I won't have to. You're making a fool of yourself without my help. Hank's face reddened. You think you're so smart, Callahan. You and your fancy teacher, but you're just drunk, Sheriff Morrison interrupted, appearing in the doorway behind Hank. The lawman had returned from his trip just in time, and his expression was thunderous, and embarrassing the family name. Uncle, get out, now, before I arrest you for public intoxication and threatening behavior. Hank wavered, alcohol and family loyalty warring on his face. His friends grabbed his arms, murmuring apologies, and hauled him toward the exit. But at the door, Hank turned back. This ain't finished, he snarled at Clara. Sheriff Morrison's hand went to his gun. Yes, it is. The whole town just saw what Miss Whitmore teaches. Anyone still has a problem with it, they can take it up with me, and I'll be significantly less polite than Mr. Callahan. The threat carried weight. Sheriff Morrison was respected, fair, and absolutely not someone to cross. His public endorsement shifted everything. Hank and his friends disappeared, their protests fading down the street. The room released its collective breath. Sorry about that, Miss Whitmore, the sheriff said, removing his hat. My nephew's a good worker when sober, but whiskey makes him stupid. I'll make sure there's no more trouble. Thank you, Sheriff, Clara said, voice steady despite the adrenaline Rhett could see humming through her. The demonstration continued, but the energy had changed. Morrison's drunken interruption had backfired spectacularly. Instead of intimidating people, it had united them against the kind of bullying he represented. Parents who'd been skeptical now rallied around Clara, angry that anyone would threaten their children's teacher. By the time the last family left, Clara had secured not just acceptance, but active support. George Crawford promised funding for new books. Sarah Hutchins offered to help organize a parents' committee to assist with supplies. Even Marcus Webb, who'd been cautiously neutral, pledged to use his banking connections to find additional resources. When they were finally alone, Clara collapsed into her desk chair and started laughing. Not hysterical laughter, pure, relieved joy. We did it, she said between gasps. We actually did it. Rhett allowed himself a small smile. You did it. I just stood there looking threatening. You did more than that. Clara stood, crossed to him, and wrapped her arms around his waist. You showed up. You stood beside me. You made it possible for me to be brave because I knew I wasn't alone. Rhett held her close, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling the solid reality of her against him. They'd survived. Not just survived, won, changed minds, built support, proved that ideas could triumph over fear. What happens now? He asked. Now we keep going, keep teaching, keep building. Clara pulled back to meet his eyes. Together. Together, Rhett echoed, and the word felt like a vow. They locked up the schoolhouse as afternoon shadows lengthened, both exhausted but satisfied. Outside, Stillwater had returned to its normal rhythm, people going about their business, children playing, life continuing. But something fundamental had shifted. Clara had claimed her place in this community, and Rhett had claimed his place beside her. As they walked toward where their horses waited, Clara spoke quietly. I need to tell you something. Rhett's stomach dropped. What? I love you. The words hit like a physical blow, not because they were unexpected. He'd felt this building between them for weeks, but because hearing them made it real, made it something he couldn't ignore or rationalize away. Clarice, you don't have to say it back. I just needed you to know. She smiled, tentative but genuine. Whatever happens next, whatever we build or how we stumble, you should know that I love you. Scars and fear and walls and all. Rhett stopped walking, turned to face her fully. Every instinct screamed to deflect, to protect himself, to maintain the distance that had kept him safe for 16 years. Instead, he chose honesty. I love you too, and that terrifies me more than anything I've ever felt. Clara's smile widened. I know. What if I'm not enough? What if my damage is too deep, too broken? Then we'll figure it out together. That's what love is, Rhett. Not perfection. Not having all the answers. Just choosing each other. again and again, even when it's hard. He kissed her then, there in the middle of Main Street with half of Stillwater potentially watching. Kissed her like she was oxygen and he'd been drowning. Kissed her like maybe, just maybe, hope was stronger than fear. When they finally separated, both breathless, Clara laughed softly. That's going to be all over town by dinner. Let it be. No more hiding? No more hiding. They rode out together as the sun descended toward the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. And for the first time in 16 years, Rhett Callahan felt something other than isolated. He felt alive. 3 weeks after the demonstration, Rhett stood in the doorway of his ranch house, watching dawn break over land that no longer felt like a fortress. Clara had spent the night, not for the first time since they'd stopped hiding, and was still sleeping in his bed, her dark hair spread across the pillow like ink on canvas. The sight should have terrified him. Instead, it felt inevitable, like watching a river finally reach the sea after years of fighting its natural course. Jake appeared from the barn, leading a horse that favored its left front leg. The foreman caught Rhett's eye and jerked his head toward the stable, a silent request for consultation. Rhett grabbed his jacket and crossed the yard, morning frost crunching beneath his boots. "Stone bruise," Jake said, lifting the horse's hoof. "Nothing serious, but he'll need a week's rest." "Put him in the near pasture, light work only when he's ready." Jake nodded, then hesitated. "Boss, I've been meaning to say, whatever's happening with you and Miss Whitmore, it's good. You seem lighter." Rhett studied his foreman, surprised by the personal observation. In 5 years, Jake had never commented on anything beyond ranch business. "Lighter," Rhett repeated. "Less like you're carrying the whole territory on your shoulders." Jake shrugged. "Just wanted you to know we notice. The hands. We're glad." Before Rhett could respond, Jake led the horse away, leaving him standing in the stable yard feeling strangely exposed. If even Jake noticed the change, then Rhett's transformation from isolated rancher to man in love must be written across his face in letters too large to miss. He returned to the house to find Clara awake, wrapped in one of his shirts, making coffee with the comfortable familiarity of someone who belonged in this space. "Morning," she said, smiling over her shoulder. Jake looked serious. "Problem?" "Minor injury, nothing we can't handle." Rhett came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. The casual intimacy of it still felt foreign, but increasingly right. He also said, "I seem lighter." "Do you?" "I feel different. Not sure if that's the same as lighter." Clara turned in his arms, studying his face with that direct gaze that saw too much. "Different how?" Rhett considered the question seriously. "Like I've been holding my breath for 16 years and finally remembered how to exhale." That's poetic for someone who claims not to do feelings. "Don't tell anyone. I have a reputation to maintain." She laughed, the sound filling the kitchen with warmth. "Your secret's safe with me." They drank coffee together as light strengthened outside, falling into the easy silence of two people comfortable in shared space. But underneath the peace, Rhett felt something gathering. Not foreboding exactly, but awareness that this moment existed between chapters, that change was coming whether they were ready or not. The feeling crystallized 2 days later when Marcus Webb appeared at the ranch, riding hard, face grim. "Rhett!" he called, dismounting before his horse fully stopped. "We have a problem." Rhett set down the fence post he'd been positioning. "What kind of problem?" "The territorial legislature is considering a bill that would require all teachers to have formal certification from established Eastern institutions. It's aimed directly at Clara. They pass this, she can't teach anymore." The news hit like a fist to the gut. "Who's pushing it?" "Morrison's uncle, the big Morrison, Cattle Baron Morrison. He's got connections in Helena, and apparently he's still furious about how the demonstration went. This is retaliation disguised as educational standards." Rhett's jaw tightened. They'd won the local battle only to have the war escalate to the territorial level. "When's the vote?" 2 weeks. But here's the thing. Clara would need to go to Helena to testify, make the case for why practical experience should count as much as formal credentials. She goes, "I go." Webb nodded like he'd expected nothing less. "Figured you'd say that. But there's a complication. The bill's being fast-tracked because Morrison wants it settled before the cattle season. Which means, more dishi war. which means I'd have to leave right before the drive. Rhett finished the sentence, mind already calculating. The spring cattle drive was the ranch's biggest revenue event of the year. Missing it would cost thousands of dollars, potentially jeopardize contracts, and leave Jake managing a massive operation alone. I'm sorry, Webb said. I know the timing's terrible. Rhett looked toward the house where Clara was working on lesson plans, oblivious to this new threat. 16 years ago, he would have chosen the ranch without hesitation. Business over people, security over risk, the safe, logical decision. But he wasn't the same man he'd been 16 years ago, or even 16 weeks ago. Tell Clara I'll take her to Helena, Rhett said, whatever it costs. Webb's expression softened. You really love her. Yeah, I really do. Then we better make sure this trip counts. That evening, Rhett explained the situation to Clara over dinner. She listened in silence, fork halfway to her mouth, as he outlined Morrison's political maneuvering and the stakes involved. You can't miss the cattle drive, she said when he finished. Your whole year's profit depends on it. I can and I will. Rhett, that's not reasonable. I don't care about reasonable. I care about you keeping your school. Clara set down her fork. And I care about you keeping your ranch. We'll find another way. There is no other way. You need to testify in person, and you need someone with you who understands territorial politics and can navigate Helena. Then Marcus can take me. Marcus isn't... Rhett stopped, searching for words. This isn't just about politics, Clara. Morrison's dangerous. If he's willing to use legislative power to hurt you, what else is he willing to do? I won't let you walk into that alone. So you'll sacrifice everything you've built? I'm not sacrificing anything. I'm making a choice. He reached across the table, taking her hand. The ranch will survive one missed season. We've got savings, contracts for next year, good land. But if you lose that school, those kids lose their future. That matters more than money. Claire's eyes filled with tears. When did you become this person? What person? Someone who puts other people first. Someone who chooses connection over safety. Rhett squeezed her hand. You know exactly when. The day a runaway wagon nearly killed Emma Brennan and I couldn't walk away. And you've regretted it every day since? Not even once. She came around the table and settled into his lap, arms wrapping around his neck. I love you. You know that, right? I know, and I love you, which is why we're going to Helena, and you're going to keep that school, and Morrison's going to learn that some things can't be bought or bullied. What about the cattle drive? Jake can handle it. He's been running operations for years anyway. I'm just the figurehead who signs the papers. Clara pulled back to study his face. You're scared, terrified, of leaving the ranch, of trusting someone else with something that important, of betting everything on a political fight we might lose. He touched her cheek. But I'm more scared of what happens if I don't try, if I choose safety over what's right and spend the rest of my life wondering what could have been. When did you get so brave? I'm not brave. I'm just done being a coward. They left for Helena 5 days later, after Rhett spent every waking hour preparing Jake for the drive. He reviewed contracts, mapped routes, went over contingencies until Jake finally told him to stop worrying or get left behind. I've got this, boss, Jake said the night before Rhett's departure. You go fight your battle. Let me fight mine. If anything goes wrong, then I'll handle it. That's what you pay me for. Jake's expression turned serious. Besides, seems to me you've spent 16 years making sure nothing goes wrong here. Maybe it's time to trust that you built something strong enough to stand without constant supervision. The observation cut deeper than Jake probably intended. Rhett had built the ranch as a fortress, yes, but also as a prison. Something requiring constant vigilance, constant control, constant sacrifice of everything else. Walking away from it, even temporarily, felt like abandoning a child. But Clara was worth it. The school was worth it. And maybe Jake was right. Maybe the ranch was strong enough to survive without him. They rode out at dawn, just the two of them, heading northeast toward Helena and whatever awaited there. The journey would take 4 days of hard riding, putting them in the territorial capital with 3 days to spare before the legislative session. The miles passed in comfortable conversation and stretches of silence that didn't need filling. They camped under stars so bright they seemed close enough to touch, and Rhett watched Clara sleep by the fire, memorizing the curve of her cheek, the the way her hand curled beneath her chin. "I can feel you staring," she murmured without opening her eyes. "Can't help it." "Why?" "Because this is the first time in 16 years I've felt present in my own life. Like I'm actually living instead of just surviving." Clara opened her eyes, firelight dancing in their depths. "That's the nicest thing anyone's ever said to me." "It's just the truth." "Then come here and kiss me for it." He did, and the kiss tasted like possibility, like futures they might build together if they were brave enough, strong enough, lucky enough. Helena materialized on the fourth day, a city carved into mountain slopes, its buildings clinging to hillsides with the determination of settlers who refused to accept that some places weren't meant for civilization. The territorial capital bustled with activity, legislators, lobbyists, businessmen all converging for the session. Rhett secured rooms at a boarding house run by a widow named Mrs. Fletcher, who took one look at Clara's Eastern manners and Rhett's frontier roughness and made immediate assumptions. "2 rooms," Rhett said firmly, "and we're not married." Mrs. Fletcher's eyebrows climbed. "Not married?" "Not yet," Clara added, and Rhett felt his heart stutter at the casual certainty in those 2 words. They spent the evening preparing Clara's testimony, reviewing arguments, anticipating counterpoints. Marcus had sent ahead detailed notes about which legislators were sympathetic, which were bought by Morrison, which might be swayed by compelling evidence. "The key is demonstrating value," Clara said, pacing the boarding house parlor. "They need to see that practical teaching produces results formal credentials can't match. Then bring examples. Student work, letters from parents, concrete evidence that your methods work." "I have all that. But will it be enough against Morrison's money and influence?" Rhett caught her hand as she passed, pulling her to a stop. "It'll be enough because you'll make it enough. You convince Stillwater, you can convince Helena. Stillwater knows me. Helena sees me as some Eastern woman playing at frontier life. Then show them you're not playing. Show them steel." The legislative session began the next morning in a building that aspired to grandeur and achieved competent functionality. Rhett sat in the gallery watching legislators debate matters of taxation and land rights, studying the power dynamics, identifying allies and enemies. Morrison was easy to spot, a bull of a man in expensive clothes, working the room with practiced ease, shaking hands and making promises. When his eyes landed on Rhett, recognition and displeasure flickered across his face. "Callahan," Morrison said, approaching with false warmth, "didn't expect to see you in Helena. Didn't expect you to abuse legislative power for personal vendettas. Guess we're both surprised." Morrison's smile never wavered, but his eyes went cold. "I'm trying to ensure Montana's children receive quality education from properly trained professionals. That's hardly a vendetta. It's retaliation for your nephew's embarrassment. Everyone knows it." "What everyone knows," Morrison said quietly, "is that I have 17 legislators who'll vote my way regardless of what your school teacher says. You came all this way for nothing." "We'll see." Morrison leaned closer, voice dropping. "I could make problems for you disappear, Callahan. I know about your cattle drive timing, know you're losing money being here. Withdraw your support, convince the girl to leave teaching, and I'll make sure you get premium contracts next season." "You're offering me a bribe to abandon the woman I love?" "I'm offering you a business opportunity to choose profit over sentiment." Rhett smiled, and it wasn't friendly. "Here's my counteroffer. Withdraw your bill. Admit it's motivated by spite, and maybe I won't make it my personal mission to expose every dirty deal you've ever made." "You're threatening me?" "I'm promising you." Morrison's facade cracked, showing the ruthlessness underneath. "You have no idea who you're dealing with. A bully who thinks money and power excuse cruelty. I know exactly who you are, Morrison. Question is whether you know who I am." They locked eyes, 2 men accustomed to getting their way, neither willing to back down. Finally, Morrison stepped back. "This isn't over," he said. "It never is with your type, but I'm not going anywhere." Clara testified that afternoon, standing before the legislature with dignity and passion, presenting evidence of student achievement, parent testimonials, proof that her unorthodox methods produced literate, capable young people prepared for frontier life. She was magnificent, articulate, prepared, unintimidated by the power arrayed against her. Rhett watched from the gallery, chest tight with pride and fear in equal measure. Morrison's lawyers countered with arguments about standards and consistency, painting Clara as well-meaning but unqualified, suggesting her success was anomaly rather than proof of concept. The debate raged for 3 hours. Legislators asked questions ranging from genuinely curious to actively hostile. Clara answered all of them with grace and intelligence, never losing her composure even when confronted with thinly veiled contempt. When the session finally adjourned, Rhett met her in the corridor. She looked exhausted, emotionally wrung out, but still standing. "How did I do?" she asked. "You were perfect." "But was I convincing?" "You convinced me. That's all I know." That night, they walked Helena's streets in silence, both processing the day's events. The vote would come tomorrow, and despite Clara's compelling testimony, Morrison's money and influence cast a long shadow. "What if we lose?" Clara asked as they stood on a hillside overlooking the city, lights twinkling below like grounded stars. "Then we fight another way. Appeal to the territorial governor, take it to the newspapers, make it a public embarrassment Morrison can't ignore." "And if that doesn't work?" Rhett turned her to face him, hands settling on her shoulders. "Then we get married, move somewhere without Morrison's influence, and start over. But we start together." Clara's eyes widened. "Did you just propose?" "I'm saying that whatever happens tomorrow, whatever obstacles we face, I'm with you. If that's a proposal, then yes, I'm proposing. That's possibly the least romantic proposal in history. I'm new at this. Cut me some slack." Clara laughed through tears. "Yes. Yes to cutting me slack? Yes to marrying you, you impossible man. Yes to starting over if we have to. Yes to all of it." Rhett kissed her there on the hillside above Helena, sealing a promise neither of them had planned, but both had somehow known was inevitable. When they finally separated, Clara was crying openly. "I love you," she said. "Even when you propose like you're negotiating cattle prices." "I love you too. And for the record, I'd negotiate much harder for cattle." She hit his shoulder, laughing. "You're terrible at romance." "Good thing you love me anyway." "Good thing," she agreed. The legislative vote came at noon the following day. Rhett sat rigid in the gallery, as roll was called, watching the tally grow on both sides. Morrison's bloc voted predictably against Clara, their loyalty purchased with promises and pressure. But others, swayed by Clara's testimony, moved by evidence of her effectiveness, or simply opposed to Morrison's blatant power grab, voted in her favor. The final count came down to one vote. One legislator who'd remained silent throughout the debate, a rancher from the Eastern Territory named Samuel Wright. "Mr. Wright," the speaker called, "how do you vote?" Wright stood slowly, an old man whose weathered face had seen Montana grow from wilderness to civilization. "I vote to reject the certification requirement. Miss Whitmore proved she doesn't need a fancy diploma to teach children what they need to know. This territory was built by people who learned by doing, not by reading about it in books. We shouldn't punish teachers for following that tradition." The chamber erupted. Morrison's face purpled with rage. Clara grabbed Rhett's hand so hard it hurt. And the speaker gavelled the room to order, officially declaring the bill defeated by a single vote. They'd won. Rhett pulled Clara into his arms, not caring who saw, not caring about propriety. She was shaking, laughing, crying all at once. "We did it," she whispered. "We actually did it." "You did it? I just stood there looking supportive." "You did so much more than that." As they left the building, Morrison intercepted them on the steps. His expression was cold fury barely contained. "This isn't over, Callahan. You've made an enemy today." "I made an enemy the day I chose Clara over your intimidation. Today just confirmed it." "You'll regret crossing me." Clara stepped forward before Rhett could respond. "Mr. Morrison, you tried to destroy my school because your nephew got embarrassed. You abused legislative power for personal revenge. You lost because goodness and truth matter more than money and influence. If you can't see that, I pity you." Morrison stared at her, speechless, then turned and stalked away. "That was brave," Rhett said. "Or stupid. Usually both." They rode out of Helena the next morning, the return journey feeling lighter despite the hard miles ahead. 3 days of riding brought them back within sight of Stillwater, and Rhett felt his chest tighten as familiar landmarks emerged. The ranch looked exactly as they'd left it. Buildings standing, fences intact, no visible disasters. But when they rode into the yard, Jake emerged from the barn with an expression that made Rhett's stomach drop. "What happened?" Rhett demanded, dismounting quickly. "Nothing catastrophic, but we had trouble on the drive. Rustlers hit us 2 days out. We lost maybe 50 head before we fought them off." Rhett's jaw clenched. 50 head was significant loss, but not devastating. "Anyone hurt?" "Cooper took a bullet to the shoulder. He'll recover." "I took one to the leg." Jake gestured to the bandage, visible beneath torn pants. "Been worse." "You should have sent word." "And what? Had you abandoned Miss Whitmore's fight to rush back for something already handled?" Jake shook his head. "I made a choice, boss. Same kind you've been making lately. Figured it was time I learned from example." Clara had dismounted and was examining Jake's injury with practiced efficiency. "This needs proper cleaning. You could lose the leg to infection." "It's fine, ma'am." "It's not fine, and you'll let me treat it or explain to Rhett why you were too stubborn to accept help." Jake looked at Rhett, who just shrugged. "She's going to be my wife. Get used to losing arguments." "Your wife?" Jake's face split into a rare smile. "Well, hell, congratulations, boss." "Thanks. Now let her fix your leg before it falls off." The next weeks blurred into activity. Cooper recovered slowly but steadily. The remaining cattle sold for good prices despite the losses. And Rhett threw himself into planning a wedding that Clara insisted should be simple but meaningful. "Just family and friends," she said, sketching ideas. "Nothing fancy. We don't have much family. Then friends. The people who matter." The ceremony took place on a Saturday in late spring, outside the schoolhouse Clara had fought so hard to keep. Emma Brennan scattered wildflowers. Michael Hutchins and Tommy Chen stood awkward in their Sunday best. Jake served as Rhett's best man despite his limp. And Sarah Hutchins, who'd once opposed everything Clara represented, baked the wedding cake. Sheriff Morrison officiated, reading words about commitment and partnership that resonated deeper than traditional vows. When it came time for Rhett to speak, he set aside the prepared statement and spoke from the heart. "Clara, you taught me that survival isn't the same as living, that walls built to keep pain out also keep joy out. That love, real love, isn't weakness. It's the bravest thing a person can do." His voice caught. "I spent 16 years alone because I was afraid. You showed me that fear is just another challenge to face. That connection matters more than safety. That building something with someone is worth every risk." Clara was crying openly, not bothering to hide tears. When her turn came, she said simply, "Rhett, you chose me when choosing me cost you everything familiar. You stood beside me when standing alone would have been easier. You taught me that strength comes in many forms, and the strongest people are those who admit they're scared but try anyway. I love you. Today, tomorrow, always." They kissed as husband and wife while Stillwater cheered, and Rhett felt something fundamental settle into place. This was home now, not just land and buildings, but people and connection and shared purpose. The celebration continued into evening. The schoolhouse transformed into a dance hall, fiddles playing while couples whirled. Rhett, who'd never danced in his life, let Clara teach him the basics, stumbling through steps and not caring who saw. "You're terrible at this," she laughed. "I'm terrible at a lot of things. You married me anyway." "I married you because you're good at the things that matter." "Like what?" "Like loving me. Like showing up. Like choosing hope over fear." They danced as stars emerged, and when the last guest finally departed, Rhett and Clara stood alone in the schoolhouse where this chapter of their lives had begun. "Ready to go home?" Rhett asked. Clara smiled. "I am home, wherever you are." "That's almost romantic. I'm learning from your example." They rode to the ranch through darkness, comfortable in shared silence. The house waited, no longer empty but full of possibility. This was the future Rhett had never believed possible. Partnership, love, connection. It still terrified him sometimes, but the fear was manageable now, balanced by joy and purpose, and the simple certainty that whatever came next, he wouldn't face it alone. 3 months later, Clara discovered she was pregnant. Rhett held the news like glass, afraid to believe, afraid to hope, afraid this happiness was too fragile to survive reality's harsh testing. "Tell me what you're thinking," Clara said, watching his face. "I'm thinking about my father, about how losing my mother destroyed him, about whether I'm strong enough to handle this kind of love." And I'm choosing to try anyway, because you're right, fear is just another challenge. and I'm done letting it win. Their daughter arrived the following spring during a thunderstorm that rattled windows and reminded everyone that Montana gave nothing easily. Clara labored for 18 hours while Rhett paced holes in the floor, useless and terrified in equal measure. When the midwife finally emerged with a squalling bundle, Rhett stared at the tiny face and felt his entire world reorganize around this new, fragile life. "She's perfect," Clara whispered, exhausted but radiant. "She's terrifying. She's ours." They named her Sarah, after Clara's mother, and Eleanor, after Rhett's. Sarah Eleanor Callahan, a name that honored the women who'd shaped them, who'd loved and been lost, but whose influence echoed forward. Rhett held his daughter that first night, watching her sleep, and understood finally what his father had felt. This overwhelming, suffocating, beautiful terror of loving something so completely that losing it would destroy you. But he also understood what his father hadn't, that the risk was worth it, that this small weight in his arms justified every moment of fear, every sleepless night, every terrifying possibility. "I love you," he whispered to Sarah, "and I promise I'll be here, no matter how scared I get, no matter how hard it is. I'll be here." Clara appeared in the doorway, watching him with their daughter. "You're already a better father than you think. I'm already more terrified than I thought possible." Same thing, usually. The years that followed weren't easy. Ranch life never was. They faced drought and disease, economic downturns, and personal challenges. Sarah grew into a fierce, brilliant child who inherited her mother's determination and her father's quiet strength. The school expanded. Clara trained other teachers, spread her methods, built something that outlasted any single person's presence. Emma Brennan became her assistant, then took over when Clara stepped back to raise Sarah, and eventually Sarah's younger brother, Thomas. The ranch prospered under Rhett and Jake's partnership, growing not just in acreage but in reputation for fair dealing and quality stock. Rhett never fully conquered his fear of loss, but he learned to live alongside it, to choose connection despite the risk. On their 10th anniversary, sitting on the porch watching sunset paint the Bitterroot Range in shades of gold and crimson, Clara asked if he had any regrets. Rhett considered the question seriously, watching Sarah chase fireflies in the yard while Thomas toddled after his sister. "I regret the years I wasted," he said finally. "All that time alone, convinced isolation was strength. But I don't regret anything after you." "Not even the scary parts?" "Especially the scary parts. They taught me that bravery isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what matters despite being terrified." Clara leaned against his shoulder, her hand finding his. "You know what I think?" "What?" "I think your father would be proud of you. Not for the ranch or the money or the success, but for choosing to love despite knowing what loss feels like." Rhett's throat tightened. He'd spent so many years running from his father's ghost, afraid of becoming him. But Clara was right. His father hadn't been weak for loving. He'd been human, and his collapse after loss didn't negate the joy he'd found in loving. "Thank you," Rhett said quietly. "For what?" "For not giving up on me. For being patient while I learned how to be human again." "You were always human, Rhett. You just forgot for a while." They sat in comfortable silence while the sky darkened and stars emerged, one by one, steady and eternal. Sarah finally tired herself out and climbed into Rhett's lap, sweaty and grass-stained and perfect. "Papa," she said, voice drowsy, "tell me a story." "What kind of story?" "A true one, about when you were brave." Rhett exchanged glances with Clara, who smiled encouragement. "Once," he began, "there was a man who was so afraid of being hurt that he built walls around his heart. He thought if he stayed alone, he'd stay safe. And he did stay safe. But he also stopped living." Sarah nestled closer, listening with the absolute attention children give to stories. Then one day, a runaway wagon threatened someone innocent, and the man had to choose: stay safe behind his walls or risk everything to help. He chose to help, and that choice changed everything. Did he get hurt? Not by the wagon, but he did fall in love with a brave, stubborn woman who refused to let him hide, and falling in love was the scariest thing he'd ever done. Scarier than the wagon? Much scarier, because wagons can only hurt your body. Love can hurt your heart. Sarah frowned, processing this. "But if it hurts, why do people do it?" Rhett looked at Clara, at Thomas sleeping in her arms, at the ranch spread before them in twilight. Because the joy is worth the risk, because being safe but alone is the same as being dead, because love, real love, makes everything else matter. Did the man stay scared? Always, but he did it anyway. Sarah smiled, satisfied with this answer, and within minutes had drifted to sleep against his chest. Rhett carried her inside, tucked her into bed with the tenderness of someone who'd learned that strength comes in many forms. When he returned to the porch, Clara was standing at the railing, silhouetted against stars. "That was a good story," she said. "It was the truth." "I know. That's what made it good." Rhett joined her, wrapping his arms around her waist from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "You know what's strange?" "What?" "I spent 16 years convinced that survival required isolation. That connection was weakness. That love destroyed people." He paused. "And now I can't imagine surviving without you. Without this." "So you were wrong?" "Completely. Love didn't destroy me. Loneliness was destroying me. You saved my life, Clara. You and Sarah and Thomas and this whole messy, terrifying, beautiful thing we've built." Clara turned in his arms, moonlight catching the silver threads beginning to show in her dark hair. 10 years together had marked them both. Lines around their eyes, scars from life's battles, the gentle wearing of time. But underneath, they were still the people who'd chosen each other despite every reason not to. "We saved each other," Clara corrected. "I was dying too, just differently. Dying of purpose without connection, of conviction without love. We found each other exactly when we needed to." "You believe in fate?" "I believe in choice. And I believe we keep choosing each other every day. That's stronger than fate." Rhett kissed her then, slow and deep and full of 10 years' worth of gratitude and love, and the certain knowledge that he'd found something worth more than safety. When they finally separated, both smiling, Clara said, "You know what Sarah asked me yesterday?" "What?" "She asked if we'd always been brave, if we'd ever been scared of anything." "What did you tell her?" "I told her that bravery isn't not being scared. It's being terrified and doing the right thing anyway, and that her father is the bravest person I know." "You're giving me too much credit." "I'm giving you exactly the right amount. You changed everything, Rhett, for yourself, for me, for our children. You proved that people can choose differently, can break patterns, can become who they need to be instead of staying who they were. We did that together." "Together," Clara agreed. They stood on the porch as night deepened, watching their land settle into darkness. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. Closer, the horses shifted in their stalls. The ranch breathed around them, alive and growing, a testament to what could be built when people chose connection over isolation. Rhett thought about his father, buried 16 years now in ground, that had reclaimed his body but not his lesson. Daniel Callahan had loved and lost and broken, but the breaking hadn't come from loving. It had come from losing and having nothing else to hold on to. Rhett had built differently. He'd built a life with multiple foundations. Clara, yes, but also the ranch, the community, the children, the purpose. If tragedy struck, when tragedy struck, because life guaranteed pain eventually, he'd have something to hold on to besides grief. That was the difference. That was the lesson it had taken him 34 years and one stubborn schoolteacher to learn. Love didn't destroy you if you built your life on more than one pillar. Community didn't weaken you if you chose it deliberately. Connection wasn't dangerous if you maintained yourself within it. "What are you thinking?" Clara asked, reading his silence. "That I'm not my father, that I've built something he couldn't, that our children will grow up understanding what he never did." Which is that strength isn't solitude. It's choosing to love despite the risk. It's building relationships that support rather than consume you. It's being brave enough to be vulnerable. Clara's eyes shone. "When did you get so wise?" "When you refused to let me stay stupid." She laughed, the sound carrying across the quiet ranch. "I love you, Rhett Callahan." "I love you, Clara Callahan. Always." They went inside together, checking on sleeping children one last time before retiring to their own bed. And as Rhett drifted towards sleep with Clara's breathing synchronizing with his own, he felt something he'd never thought possible. Peace. Not the peace of absence, no danger, no challenge, no fear, but the peace of acceptance, of knowing that tomorrow would bring problems and fear and the constant risk of loss, and choosing to face it anyway because the alternative was dying inside. He'd survived 16 years alone, but he'd only started living when Clara arrived. And now, surrounded by family and purpose and love, Rhett Callahan finally understood his father's last words. Daniel had whispered, "It was worth it," before dying, and young Rhett had thought he meant the pain was worth surviving, but he'd meant the love was worth the pain. And lying there in the darkness, holding the woman who'd saved him from himself, Rhett finally agreed. It was worth it. Every terrifying, beautiful moment, every choice to risk instead of retreat, every step toward connection instead of isolation, all of it. Worth it. The stars wheeled overhead, the land breathed around them, and somewhere in the house a child dreamed of stories about brave people choosing love despite fear. The man who'd chosen solitude had become a man who chose family, and in that transformation, Rhett Callahan had finally found what he'd been searching for all along. Not safety, not isolation, not the absence of pain, but a life worth living, a legacy worth leaving, a love worth fighting for. Under the vast Montana sky, on land that gave nothing easily but rewarded those who persevered, Rhett had built more than a ranch. He'd built a future, and it was everything he'd never known he wanted.